Um, so now, Ms. Luckey, it's your time to begin for your opening remarks.
Okay,
you may begin.
Give me a second to unpin Donald. Remove pin. Okay, there we are. You can see me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'd like to also thank Donald for doing this. I think that it is, clearly very important for us on either side of a debate topic to be able to hear what each other thinks. And I appreciate Donald's perspective, although I don't agree with it. But I'll go ahead with my written remarks. When I went to bartending school in my 20s, they told us there are 3 things you should never talk about with customers: sex, politics, and religion. So, so much for that, because God has helped me. Here I am about to talk to you about all 3. Oh, but seriously, there are 2 parts of this proposition before us today. I will take them each in turn and then link them together. The first part is the LGBTQ agenda poisoning Western civilization. Let's dissect this a little bit so we can hopefully all be on the same page. The LGBTQ agenda. So what is it? It kind of depends on who you are asking. But for me, it comes down to fighting for our protections, for our unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as promised in the 2nd sentence of our Declaration of Independence. Plain and simple. As James Baldwin so eloquently said, we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. Well, for me, I will love you anyways, because that is what Jesus called us to do. But at the same time, if you are trying to deny my right to exist as an American citizen, then I have no other choice but to call you out on it and fight you every step of the way with whatever I have at my disposal. As evidenced by the hundreds of anti-LGBTQ legislative bills either passed or moving through red state legislatures, radical Christian extremists are doing everything in their power to make it as hard as they can for LGBTQ folks to enjoy those unalienable rights. And no, the LGBTQ agenda is not about making your son or daughter gay or transgender. Like it or not, we are born this way. Books and teachers and support groups and the rest cannot make someone who is heterosexual or cisgender gay or transgender. That is a fact. The only thing we can do is to make sure that people who are LGBTQ feel safe and supported so they do not fall into despair, resulting in self-harm. And that goes double for LGBTQ youth. If you are one of those people who say that they would rather see their son dead rather than gay, then one can only logically conclude that you need to reconsider what it truly means to be a parent. Believe me, I sometimes wish I were not transgender because life would be so much easier. I spent 50 years in the prison of the closet because society finds me guilty. But as much as I tried to push those feelings down, there was no escaping it. Before I ever even knew about trans issues or LGBT issues or all that, I knew I needed to transition if I was going to survive. I didn't read a book. I didn't talk to other trans people. I was not indoctrinated. The only thing I knew is that I could no longer live a lie. Living that lie as a cisgender person was poisoning my health and well-being. And I knew I no longer wanted to live that way. Repeat, I was born this way and had no choice. And that leads me to the proposition and the word poisoning. A poison is defined as a substance that is capable of causing the illness or death of a living organism when introduced or absorbed. The living organism in our case is Western civilization, and I would say that for a poison to be a poison, it must be harmful to the living organism. But where is the harm in inclusion? Where is the harm in making our society equitable to everyone? Where is the harm in loving oneself and others? Where is the harm of allowing people to be the way they were born? I am sure that folks like Donald can conjure up any number of perceived harms. But I can say with the utmost confidence that anything he comes up with will be total rubbish. The LGBTQ experience strives towards inclusion, equity, love, and acceptance. And to me, that is about as Christ-like as one can get. Western civilization. This one is a bit more complicated, to say the least. I think that when most people talk about Western civilization, what they are really referring to is white European fundamentalist Christian civilization. So when Donald says the LGBTQ agenda is poisoning Western civilization, what he really means is that queer people threaten the power structure that white fundamentalist Christian folks have cultivated for centuries and enjoy to this day. But when we talk about Western civilization in terms of the democratic principles of freedom for all, which people on both sides of the fence tout, Donald's arguments fall very short of that laudable goal, because at its roots, European fundamentalist Christian civilization has proven itself to be antithetical to inclusion, diversity, and tolerance. This too is counter to what Jesus tells us on how we should treat one another. Without those three things being present in our democratic representative republic, inclusion, diversity, and tolerance, there will always be division within our American society. Civil discourse should be the rule, not the exception for a democracy to flourish. Such divisions have already led to a drastic decline of civil society. Just look at Twitter and Facebook to see how uncivilly we treat each other. Isn't a civil society that is inclusive of everyone much more preferable than a society constantly at war with itself? Isn't a civil society much more productive when everyone is elevated? I certainly think so. And just to be clear, the LGBT community are not the ones who have been instigating a culture war. The ones involved in identity politics are politicians, preachers, pundits, and TV personalities on the right. They demonize any group they see fit, especially the LGBTQ community, in order to gin up fear, in order to enhance their grasp on power. This is as plain as the nose on your face if only you open your eyes and see the truth. Then gaslighting everyone, they point a finger at us on the left, accusing us of starting culture wars, when in essence, all we are doing is defending ourselves against the constant onslaught of harmful rhetoric resulting in discriminatory behaviors, governmental policies, and legislation. We would not be looking to strengthen our protections under the law if you all would just leave us the hell alone. Everything the LGBT community has done and is doing is completely in self-defense. What we are saying is that in a supposedly free society and under the protections of our rights in the US Constitution, you do not have a right to impose your religious value system on us. No one in this LGBTQ community is saying you have to be queer, but you all do say that we have to adhere to your interpretation of Christianity. And you are trying to force that value system on us through legislative processes. You are living in glass houses and you have cast the first stones. And one last thing before I move on to the second part of the proposition. We get accused of playing the victim as if we are not actually being victimized. This is another example of gaslighting that is being done. They say, oh, you're playing the victim card, as if we are not victims of their onslaught of attacks. In my mind, this is a textbook example of what gaslighting means. Now, the second part of the proposition is radical Christian extremism the ultimate cancer? Dissecting this, we first have radical Christian extremism. I define this to mean fundamentalist Christians engaged in politics and or terrorism to bring about a Christian theocracy here in the United States and elsewhere in the world. I am not saying this about all Christians, just those engaged in these activities. The ultimate cancer. Ultimate is defined as being or happening at the end of a process, and cancer defined as a disease in which some of the body's cells grow uncontrollably and spread to other parts of the body. And for our purposes today, that body is a free society underpinned by democracy. Here's the thing. Radical Christian extremists know they are losing the cultural war they started. Poll after poll show they are outnumbered. Poll after poll shows their messages of discrimination and oppression of LGBTQ folks is not popular with the majority of folks living in our country. Their messaging has become so toxic that young people are leaving their churches in droves. You see, in a democracy, it is the majority who rule. We all know this is how it's supposed to be. And because these radical Christian extremists are in the minority, they are increasingly turning towards attempts at authoritarian rule. Authoritarianism is defined as the enforcement or advocacy of strict obedience to authority at the expense of personal freedom. While these radical Christian extremists, in the form of right-wing politicians, preachers, pundits, and TV personalities, as I mentioned previously, while they say they are all about freedom for all, they are lying to you. What they are really angling for is a Christian theocracy under which, through authoritarianism, everyone will be forced to abide by laws that are strictly informed by their interpretation of the Bible. And they are willing to engage in violence, as demonstrated by the insurrection on January 6, 2021. How is this any different from Islamic Sharia law? It's not. Why do you think these right-wing politicians, preachers, pundits, and TV personalities have been praising Putin? He is the epitome of what they want to see here in our country, because they know if left up to an unfettered vote, the majority of Americans will vote against the Christian theocracy radical Christian extremists are trying to install. If allowed to succeed, this will result in the removal of the personal freedoms of a majority of Americans that do not subscribe to their interpretations. The will of the people will have been supplanted. This anti-democracy cancer will lead to less personal freedom and cause pain and suffering to those who are on the receiving end of the discriminatory laws and policies they will undoubtedly put into place. So, in summation, the LGBTQ agenda is nothing more than LGBTQ folks and their allies fighting to protect our rights as American citizens under the Constitution to not be discriminated against in the areas of housing, jobs, healthcare, and public spaces, to name a few. We are fighting for our rights under the weight of continued assaults on us by radical Christian extremists who would destroy our American democracy and install an authoritarian Christian theocracy as a way in which to control the masses and retain power in an environment where their messaging of fire and brimstone is not resonating with the majority of the American electorate. Radical Christian extremists don't want freedom for all. They want the freedom to wield power that is discriminatory against all those they deem as a threat. They are losing the unprovoked war they themselves started, and some of them are now marching to the drums of an all-out physical civil war. And this, my friends, is the malignant cancer that is infecting our Western civilization of democracy. And if left unchecked, our country will devolve into an authoritarian Christian dictatorship, resulting in the pain and suffering of tens of millions of people. And for me, that is about as far from Christ's message of universal love as we can get. For love, for peace, for tolerance, for humankind.